You're listening to Potluck, the podcast that stirs up a unique flavor of people, culture, and brands in Asia. Hosted, as always, by Scott and Drago.
So, welcome back to Potluck. I'm Drago.
And I'm Scott.
And who better to stir the pot with us today, in this very moment, than Hass Aminian. Scott, how can we best capture the essence of Hass?
That's a dangerous question, Drago. And we've tried to condense it. So Hass is a man of many talents. So that's a tall order, but let's have a go. His career started as a production manager with IMG, spearheading broadcast initiatives around the inaugural Chinese Super League, events like the Super Bowl, and iconic shows like Trans World Sport. Some of our UK listeners might remember some Saturday mornings spent watching downhill skiing and Georgian wrestling. He then managed programming at the MediaCore channel Sport City, worked in sports sponsorship with Red Mandarin, and was a key part in growing the Stand Chart Singapore Marathon. In 2013, around the time that I personally met Hass for the first time, he transitioned into action sports with leading sports marketing agency Sport 5. That was a key moment as it paved the way to founding his own business, Millennial Events, organising everything from the Vans Park series to the mass series of skateboarding events and Uprising Tokyo. As part of this today, Hass advises both brands, government organisations on youth development programmes, participation initiatives and activation, principally around skateboarding and action sports. Okay. Hass is a good friend, supporter of Potluck, and is making a long overdue appearance. Welcome to the show, Hass.
Thank you, guys. It's we've had many conversations, and it's nice to put some of it on record.
So Hass, you've been in sports marketing for 30 years. You've seen how the industry has evolved dramatically across agency, broadcast and event roles. We'd love to trace that journey quickly. If you could give us a quick snapshot of those like three eras, if you like, the agency, the broadcast, events. So what was the game and what were the rules at each part of that journey?
I think, events and entertainment and sports particularly lend themselves to a big role for agents to broker assets and rights between brands, between broadcasters and rights holders. And the initial stage working for IMG, at that time, the world's largest sports marketing agency, we learnt the rules of engagement with rights holders in terms of creating commercial packages, creating broadcast packages, and making them deliverable for commercial terms with broadcasters or brands. So that was how the world started for me. And it was nice to first do it around the television product, magazine shows, news shows, and even documentaries that were built around the history of sport, the history of the Olympics, and evolved from there to the broadcast work that I did. The Singapore government looked to liberalize the media landscape, and they gave in the late 90s the print monopoly a television license, and the television broadcast monopoly at that time, TCS, a print license. And that competition created a lot more content, a lot more channels and newspapers and digital brands, and gave the opportunity for the Singapore market to appreciate, a competitive landscape in media, which was huge at the time. I think there was almost a doubling of media inventory. Wow. But the cost to that was competition, which drove up the cost of content, and also competition on the rate cards and on the ads budgets, which reduced the income because people were slashing their rate cards. And that exercise, as amazing as it was, ended up with the both monopolies essentially merging and working closer together, and that's what we have at the moment. But through that exercise, the government chose to launch a ad-funded sports channel called Sport City. We were, at that time, the rights holders for the Olympic Games in 2000 out of Sydney, the Formula One series, some exciting stuff around sailing, and also the Premier League at that time had at least one game a week on free-to-air. And that time was interesting because, you know, we'd gone from the agency B2B world through to a B2C world where we had to appreciate consumer behavior, consumption, you know, the demographics of our audiences, and being able to package those and create opportunities for advertising and sponsorship. But we also got into events, and some of those events included supporting national sports events organized by national sports associations, even hosting Liverpool's visit to Singapore in 2001, which is a project in its own right.
Right.
Is that this sort of Spice Boys era of Redknapp and McManaman, these kind of players?
They were just beginning to come out.
Okay.
Steven Gerrard was here as a youngster. But through to even obviously, you know, supporting events landscape and informing the government's potential to get involved. And that's where I transitioned from MediaCorp through to becoming a consultant for the government, where we helped launch the Standard Chartered Singapore Marathon, which is now one of the largest in Southeast Asia, commercializing a lot of events that were already in place, but also, you know, inviting promoters to bring their events to Singapore.
So we'd like to focus a little bit more on events today, Hass. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about events? What happened after that?
Yeah, I mean, the evolution of events that I've been, you know, lucky to be involved in, obviously started from the days of packaged rights and working with rights holders and working within frameworks and hierarchies, and that has some restrictions, but obviously the status is appealing to brands. But, you know, as I've transitioned into working in the action sports space, and particularly around skateboarding, we are a lot more flexible in being able to create experiential projects, events for brands, for government agencies that is custom built around a need. And because it involves other cultural elements, which include fashion and photography and music and film and graphic design, some of these allow you to be really creative in how you bring projects to life. And that's one of the exciting things about working on my own and being able to work with partners, other agencies, and the community itself.
Fantastic.
To create brands.
Fantastic. So yeah, we'd like to focus on the third age of Hass today. We'd like to zoom in on events, and we'd like to talk about the full spectrum of it, if that's okay. So on the one hand, I guess we have the smaller scale, grassroots, more organic type of event, all the way through to the other end where you have bigger corporate sponsored type of event. So we'd like to start first with the smaller type. And as you mentioned, skateboarding, action sports is a big part of what you do now. Can we start with a skateboarding event? Because we feel, particularly right now, as brands seek to tap into authenticity, to be closer to culture, skateboarding lends itself particularly well to this type of approach where brands can embrace street culture, sport, community art, all of this kind of coming together. And looking at the ecosystem of it and all the stakeholders involved, as you said, we feel that this is kind of a rich territory to explore. So can we start with something that you did very recently called Ramp It Up in Singapore? Just a brief intro and let me know if I'm getting this right. 58 competitors. Entry fees were between $5 to $10. Local skate brands involved. There was a legally blind competitor who was participating. A number of different fans who drove all the way from various parts of other countries across Asia. So, can you help us unpack the inner workings of this kind of event? What made it special? What kind of brands were involved, and what brands can learn from this kind of event? Let's start with that. So, what was the purpose of this event for you?
Yeah, I mean, the Ramp It Up is a project that has some history in Singapore. It's possibly the longest running skateboard series. Its roots started around a festival that was created around National Day celebrations. And they wanted a sport that would lend itself to youth interest and bring the younger community, because at that time, you know, as we know, the demographics around sports as a participation can vary greatly. but we were able to create a format that brought not only young people, but young families and beginners, emerging talents, and so on together. Over the years, it's evolved, but essentially the key ingredients of its purpose was to provide skateboarding at a high standard, but in front of a wider public. So the formats we used were over the years have been mainly around a mini ramp, and the competition formats are, if you're familiar with basketball and the game of horse, we call it the game of skate, where it's two people going head to head, one sets a trick, and if the other one cannot match it, has to pick a letter from the word skate. And the first person to reach the full word is out, and the winner progresses to go head to head with the next winner. So you create a ladder format. This idea of skill around one trick and being able to have a lead person set it creates excitement, really accessibility, because it can quickly drop out talent, but also interestingly, it is competitive between age groups, sometimes between abilities, and even gender. So in an open category, you can bring different people together to really create excitement. When we ran the event a few years ago, a young Singaporean skater, Tina, made it all the way to the finals and beat one of the more established male skaters. That creates excitement that you can't bottle. It's really amazing. So that's how the format comes about. The event this year, we also held alongside simpler events, low key for beginners. So we were able to appeal to kids who were there was one skater, I think he just turned 6. He was in a competition format with other skaters who were a bit more established. And that creates an opportunity for young families to come and bring their kids to see the better skaters perform, but also have their younger kids being involved. We also always try to include the pioneer generations, people who've are a little bit more established within the community. So we also included on the Sunday morning a legends category, and that coincides with the community themselves, who I know, as a matter of fact, get together on Sunday mornings and skate in skate parks. So that's the way of us, mirroring their habits with our program.
So just there's a lot to unpack there, Hass, but in terms of just like the kind of core like pillars, if you like, of this event. So you've mentioned things like, community involvement, multi-generational, young athletes, so sort of seasoned athletes. You mentioned there's a kind of educational element too, or kind of like a, grassroots, giving people a chance to try, the sport. What would you say are kind of the core pillars, if you like, that make up the overall event? Like what's kind of, what structurally, what's this all about?
Well, I think you always have to respect the audience and make sure that you create formats that are accessible. I think, if you're going to charge a registration fee, you always have to give something in return that's more than they paid, whether that's through prize money, the opportunity of, winning that, or just simple, quality judges, quality announcers, quality presentation. And, with all our events, we also have music. So all those things create value. And also, I think, our client for this project was the sports agency in Singapore. They wanted to have reach through enough people to demonstrate that there was a value, but also equality in that reach through a relationship. And that was how we delivered it, through some, excellence and execution. Drago mentioned that, people that, I think over 20 skaters drove down from Malaysia to come and attend an event. We had one entry from Japan. They flew down. They'd come to our events before. And the reason for that is because the mini ramp format and a good competition standard is something that isn't readily available. There's a scarcity in the market for that. So, the size of the mini ramp appeals to people who don't have that size mini ramp in their, closer to their homes. A competition format that's accessible and exciting is another way. And obviously the prize money has a role to play.
So you mentioned it's for a government agency. How are brands involved in this? Like, what ways do brands show up in this mix?
getting brands involved is an important part of any project. And in this one, we worked with local skater-owned brands in order to create both a marketplace for them to be able to sell their merchandise, which I think is an important part of giving back to that community and giving them the opportunity to generate income from it. So we had 3 stalls who were able to do that. We had one local community brand that provides free coaching clinics. They were there to help run the clinics for us for beginners. And we were able to work with another brand who helped build some custom ramps for an evening skate jam session. That's how we work with, these are endemic brands within the community. They come from the community and they contribute to the community. It would be interesting to see how we can take this to not mainstream brands, non-endemic brands. Whether they're telcos or drinks or others. And we've worked with them before, and usually it involves them being able to generate authentic content from an experience with their brand, with their services integrated into the project. And that content then drives their social media, whether it's through collab posts or other channels. There's obviously a transactional component where they can sell this product to this community, and this community obviously, a lot of the key members are tastemakers, trendsetters. To be able to put your product into the hands of these people is a real good way to promote your product authentically through sales channels.
So it's a full weekend event. Obviously, it's not the first iteration, so there's somewhat of a formula to build from each year. But still, when you deliver the event, of course, things must always change. It's organic. There's moving pieces. There's weather, as you mentioned. Like, how was the actual delivery? Was there anything you can draw on in terms of lessons or things you'll continue to sort of move forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we, it's kind of an underlying thought to this particular format was, we'd transitioned from doing it around National Day as part of a wider festival where we were in front of, fans who'd come for other sports and being able to deliver an authentic product, to something that this year we were inside a skate park and in a permanent facility. So we recognized that we were bringing people to a skate park. And that means that you have to work with what you have. It did rain briefly, but one of the things about working within this community as part of your team and part of your crew is that they all got together and helped mop up the water, and therefore it was dry within an hour and a half, and we were back on. So you don't lose people. One of the other things that are good about having the different generations involved is they tend to hang around even after their event's finished. That creates a lot more respect within the community. When you have the legends watching the younger kids compete, that's a fantastic component of what we do. And that doesn't always happen in events, as people get knocked out and move on. I think having specialized MCs who are familiar with the trick names, that helps present the skate culture in its in an authentic sense is important. And I think that was a big part of what we do. And having the community be the judges, be the announcers, be the part of the organization team is important. The things I would probably do differently that are always a challenge is sometimes being able to do things at a scale that the communities can do themselves more frequently, because there is a scarcity at the moment, and maybe elevating those to be a series throughout the year allows for emerging talent to come through. And this particular mini ramp format is something that we are working on, trying to figure out how we can help raise the standard of skateboarding in Singapore so they're more competitive around the region for international competitions.
I have a question about this very interesting tension there in what you are describing, where on the one hand, you're talking about depth, you're talking about endemic brands, authenticity, but you're also talking about how you had to demonstrate reach. Something interesting you mentioned, you spoke about how you need to respect the audience, yeah? Does that play a role? And how do you balance the two, being authentic, obviously closer to the ground, but also demonstrating reach? How do you work this out?
Yeah, I think that's a very important part of how we have to manage, events within action sports in general and skateboarding. we recognize that events created for the core community are always going to have a smaller attendance. But being able to present it in a way that's accessible through clear information, through social media, through creativity, through good posters, all of these things done by the community, but be able to then appeal to a wider audience in order to get the reach beyond that core community. The relationship comes with having these people involved. Both the primary stakeholders, the audience, and even the secondary ones who, are the ones who help put the ramps together and, put the, the DJs and so on. So it's about doing both. But I talked earlier about how, a lot of the leaders within this community are trendsetters. They obviously are used by mainstream brands for product seeding. They have wide reach within their own social media channels. They have skills in generating content for photos and film, and that in itself creates a distribution beyond our event. And by involving all these different components, we bring a much wider reach in the tens and hundreds of thousands and in the millions often through our social channels and their own as well. And that's how the reach is delivered through content.
But reach that may be harder to measure in a more conventional way, yeah? Because it happens through so many different channels and seeps through so many different sub-channels, yeah?
Yeah, I think on a grassroots event like this, definitely we might not have a host social account where we would do the main posting. But I think on larger scale projects, we work with a known brand, a known media partner, who, whether it's their digital or social platforms, and go and concentrate our content. And obviously then we have the tools of hashtags and handles to be able to tag and retag and measure. And one thing that's interesting, around endemic brands tend to be involved in action sports because they have a skin in the game. They have a product that they're selling to this community. Could be shoes, could be boards, could be different. But they usually have a skate program. They might have a team that they put together. They might produce films in and around their product and the relationship with that. But there are slightly broader definitions of endemic that include energy drinks, and we know that the energy drinks have a very larger investment in their social channels and content channels. So we, even though they don't necessarily support events through cash, they might bring pro athletes, they might bring their social media content team, and that in itself brings a lot of value that then makes the event appealing to mainstream brands who then can, follow through.
Yeah, it also brings to mind the analogy of brands now maybe choosing to work with lots of nano, creators and influencers as a network, as a collective for amplification versus, so the same principle might also apply to doing a series of small events, but as you say, with the earned media and the share media, etc., you can sort of amplify from there too, but create something quite authentic on the ground versus just one big bang.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that a lot of these skaters in their own right, whether formally or informally, are nano influencers because they have significant reach on their channels. They may not be registered on any of the trading platforms, but they are already involved in promoting sometimes their own brands, sometimes other people's brands, apparel, shoes, and they do it not necessarily within the sports that they're involved in, like skateboarding. They might be promoting, more wider apparel. Even I know in Singapore at the moment, and in Indonesia, and there's in Malaysia and Thailand, there's a significant number of skaters who are essentially models, and then they promote, they dress the product, whether it's through their own channels and other channels. They are actively, launching new seasons, new products, and
because I guess not. That's where I guess there's a sweet spot for skateboarding in particular, and action sports, where you have, as you say, the athlete as the creator, as the tastemaker, as the fashion influencer. I suppose if you think about other kind of on the rise sports played in a city environment like Singapore, you've got paddle, for example, or just thinking top of mind, or more niche things like parkour. And do you think the ability to roll out small events around these things, there's things you would sort of see as being directly translated translates from what you've talked about with the.
Yeah, I think it's very scalable, and from maybe in more developed markets we've seen like pizza restaurants provide free pizzas for a skate session that creates an instant marketplace for them, an instant channel. And creatively stacking up boxes creates a very simple obstacle for a skate session.
Nice.
So there's very simple ways of doing this, and then there are more complex ways of putting it together. But definitely, there's an opportunity to work within this community that is brand friendly, is iconic. They do set the trends, and they do have the reach. So yeah.
Okay. Amazing. So we'll post some clips or links to the Ramp It Up event so listeners can get a flavour of what we've actually been talking about for the first part of the show. Where else can people check out the event, Hass? Where could they find details of the...
Yeah, we Ramp It Up as a local grassroots event was promoted through two main channels. One was the government's Youth Creates social account.
Okay.
And that platform is for many different sports, but it's a sports SG's way of reaching the youth and empowering the youth through their projects. And we also worked with a young skate community group called Skate Spaces. Okay. And they provide regular clinics free of charge in skate parks around Singapore. They organize product donation drives amongst themselves when they have too many goods that they can't use, and provide hand-me-downs to the community. So we worked with both of them, and because it was a Singapore community project, we focused our content through those two channels, and it worked really well for that.
Okay.
On larger events, we would work with regional media partners, and we have our own series, Mass, which has its own social account that then reaches followers across Asia.
Okay. So on that note, let's transition from the small to the big. So you already mentioned Mass, the Mass series there. You've of course been involved in other things like the Kia Asian X Games in Shanghai, the Vans Park series. I think we even first met when you were working on Tiger Street Football around several cities in Southeast Asia with a certain Mr. Cannavaro as an ambassador. So what changes, Hass, when you've got these bigger venues, elite athletes, international coverage, big sponsors? Does do those grassroots principles still apply, or is that a totally different playbook when you go to the larger scale events?
I think larger scale events obviously take a longer gestation period. You need to work with a broader mix of people, but I think the fundamentals are the same. But I think as you bring bigger events together, there is an opportunity to bring different parts of an event together, and we've seen a development of urban festivals and urban activities come together around the different cultures, and they it's important to give each activity its own space and its own energy. There is a tendency sometimes to make mistakes around some of those, which we try to avoid. For example, using the same announcer across multiple different sports is really and doesn't really address the needs of each community. It doesn't pay respects to each different sport.
If you're talking about like an urban sports festival, for example, you mean someone that doesn't necessarily know.
They might be able to bring the hype and the excitement and the idea of risk and thrills, but they're not really bring through the trick names, the athlete names, the scoring structure, and everything else. That I think each of these, and we see that all happen a lot when these things are brought together. So it's you have to kind of bring a sophisticated mind to bring those together. It's obviously a hot topic around storytelling or cultural storytelling. I think if you're building something from scratch and you have the opportunity to work with a brand to invest in something of scale, the opportunity to bring elements of history into the project, speak to the pioneers and have them involved in some components of it. The recognition that you can have for emerging talents. All those different elements have a space and have a role to play, and I think that's something that isn't addressed enough. I think as events become bigger and the scale gives the opportunity to bring these elements in. But it's something, you mentioned Uprising Tokyo. We were able to create an event in Japan around addressing firstly the role of skateboarding within street culture, which is obviously huge in Japan. Through all various critical means. Skateboarding is not legal in many Japanese cities. We were able to address that by demonstrating the importance of street skateboarding in the talents of many of the top skaters in Japan by creating a course that included famous skate spots from around the world, street skate spots, recreated to scale within a setting in an arena, and that demonstrated that young kids who can't necessarily travel around the world to skate some of these spots, because they're in California, they're in different parts of the world, they were able to do that within an arena. So demonstrating the importance of street skateboarding. But alongside that, we also hosted a display from the Skateboard Hall of Fame, but also one of Japan's iconic first pro skaters. Okay. Memorabilia, various elements that showed the progression of the products and skateboarding over the years, and original artifacts, which is always interesting. So he's sadly passed away, but his son was there to host the public around some of that. So that brings, there's many different ways to tell stories around a project of that scale.
So by the sound of it, the bigger the event gets, obviously you have more moving parts. So you need to kind of, is it like a collection of then smaller events under a bigger umbrella? So you need to have some unifying principle behind it. You're talking about tapping into the local culture, recreating different iconic elements to the discipline, to the event, but also kind of thinking of what's authentic, what's true to each element involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a logistical component of scheduling and space and timing and getting the people who naturally fit in various schedules through your day, and then there is the creative spin around the presentation of the project, the announcers. One of the things we do around announcers is, when we work in foreign countries and we have to be mindful of the local language. So we have an announcer who speaks to that audience, but we also need an announcer who can speak to the athletes themselves to know what tricks are coming, they've done, and to know how that pitches them against their competitors. So we usually use dual language announcing in some of these events. And the way that these work together gives you both an authenticity through the trick names and the presentation, but also an educational component for the wider public.
Earlier, we spoke about the tension inherent to the smaller event between the need to bring authenticity, community involvement to it on the one hand, but also to build reach and visibility. Is there a similar kind of tension here with a larger event? And how would you measure success for a larger event in that sense? What metrics matter when it comes to a bigger scale event?
I think depending on your stakeholders and how they are looking to be involved, both not just for a one-off, maybe for multiple years. Obviously, there's a commercial component, there's an investment component. We talked earlier about my work with the Stand Chart Marathon. In the early stages, it coincided with Standard Chartered Bank expanding their banking license in Singapore and having a wider network of branches. And with that came an employee component because they were recruiting. So, we created the Standard Chartered Marathon in its earlier years was a big part of driving recruitment, employee retention, but also driving traffic to new branches. And also because of the big participation numbers, being able to launch new products and new credit cards and so on within subsets of that. So there's ways of adapting an event's various strengths to the needs of a brand. If you are lucky enough to be involved with the brand at a senior level, to be able to understand what their primary objectives are. I think the tensions of scale and involvement with stakeholders that are potentially influential within the marketplace is definitely there. And I think there's an element of risk that brands see when they get involved in these smaller but influential communities, and where there are aspects of culture and music and different components of lifestyle that means that there is the risk is potentially spread broader. And how to manage that is I think through better preparation and through appreciation of that community at an earlier stage, and goes back to that message of meeting them at their place, understanding what their needs are, and being able to invest in addressing those needs as part of your event structure. It removes the risk of that community not being with you through the project. We've done events, for example, where we've brought events to a skate park, but in doing so, we've revamped and refurbished the skate park. So once the event leaves, we're left behind a cleaner facility, a newer facility with some new elements. A lot of even the Ramp It Up event included building some custom ramps for our jam session. Those ramps are now donated to skate spots so that skaters can continue to use them. So that idea that creates a legacy, and that legacy has value that reduces some of the potential fallouts that might come from parts of the event that you can't control.
Interesting. So as long as the brand kind of goes to where they are, as long as the brand understands the culture, then you have the flexibility to either go more tactical, like what you described with stand chart in that particular year, or indeed get involved in more longer term brand building, or both at the same time, if you will.
Yeah, and it's not, because it's not measured by the exposure of brands and badging, it's involved in contribution to the needs and support of a community. It might be difficult to understand how to report that internally within a brand's reporting structure, but certainly in terms of the research that you can do in and around, the positivity in which they hold that brand is easily done.
Just coming back to the question on metrics as well, Hass. So Drago and I have both been involved in projects over the years regarding kind of measuring sponsorship impact, or, sometimes qualitatively as well, getting feedback from fans and attendees. Do you have a view on what kind of metrics you actually see as meaningful? Do you have a view on whether are the metrics inherently always trying to make the sponsor look better versus actually measuring what would be a sort of, means tested, event-specific metric, which actually makes sense? I think you mentioned something I read before about, when you're starting off small, just have a metric of, would people go back to it again the next year? Like something as simple as that, like almost like an equivalent of NPS for, would you recommend this, or would you go back to this again?
The first thing is that obviously, simple, but, broad research in understanding the community, in understanding the needs at scale, the demographics, and to be able to do that is a very simple way. But obviously post-event, to be able to demonstrate that it's not just in the exposure of your brand to that community, but to the influence that you've made in their lives, and how that, you've addressed the needs question. One thing that I see happening sometimes with mainstream non-endemic brands getting involved in skateboarding, obviously it's easy to recreate logos as a skatable element, or sometimes recreate a product as a skatable element. That is an easy starting position, but if you don't do that with the skaters in mind, you get the dimensions wrong, you get the scale wrong, you get the radius and the angles wrong, then you create bad will. So that's a simple way of, something that, pre-event research, pre-project research, finding who to work with and how to then incorporate your brand's interests, whether it's through exposure or through exposure, creating a three-dimensional iteration of the brand that gets skated, and doing that right the first time, so that it can be skated and it can be skated well, and it can adapt to skating standards within that community, is likely to deliver much better returns than post-event saying, did you notice the size of my logo in the middle of the skate park?
So we've been talking about the brand the commercial kind of moving into the community, into the event. If we kind of think of the movement in the opposite direction, where you spoke about the athletes, you spoke about the importance of nurturing the next generation, you spoke about that whole ecosystem of stakeholders, families and friends around it. What ways are there, you think, to go back to the metaphor, kind of moving from the space, from the authentic space into broader culture? What ways are there to ensure that maybe the more prominent athletes, the more recognizable athletes can live and help the brand in other spaces away from from a skateboarding space?
I see a lot of apparel brands working with skaters, not because necessarily they're skating, but simply as models for their clothes. The skating is secondary, but they recognize that as skaters and as skaters with skills, they're likely to repost those static images of clothes modeling in their channels. So that, you're having the double value of models that can be, photographed and blown up and put on posters, whilst also being distributed through very smaller channels, but highly influential because of them and their friends.
Right.
And in terms of involving
Does that answer it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this question was also rooted in the idea of when you talked about the ramp it up, you talked about how at small events, the athletes can hang around, they can watch, they can score, they can pass on advice. Obviously, a big event, athletes are down a tunnel, they're into a van, they're off doing interviews, but it still can be true that they could be involved in broader ways around the event experience, and I know there's signings and, when Singapore Rugby Sevens are on, for example, the teams turn up at schools and all these things, but do you think enough of that is sort of done to bring the athlete into the event, if you like, more than simply as a competitor?
I think there's so much, thought going into how pro athletes who have very limited time getting involved into the communities in which they're visiting.
Yeah,
and there's always an interest in doing that within communities that don't get enough support, maybe through diversity and stuff. But I think, there's definitely room in bringing the amateur cohort and the professional cohort together.
Yeah.
Sometimes through competition by having wildcard entries, sometimes through workshops and clinics and so on. And but I think people need to be aware and appreciate and cognizant of the fact that an hour's workshop is not going to necessarily impart the knowledge that's going to make a huge difference.
Sure.
And what are the other ways that you can truly make an impact into their lives? And it could be through product donation that comes from a sponsor's interest, because a lot of the amateurs may not have the budgets to buy some of those products. It could be through, legacy channels where you take those athletes to an international event outside of your home base, where you might give them an experience that can't be repeated through an international attendance. So I think those things can be done a lot better. And we're fortunate within skateboarding and action sports that we can create formats where the skaters aren't on the clock. They come early, they leave late. We build in at least one day of street skateboarding for the pros that come, so they can come and generate content off the back of that visit for their own needs and their own sponsors outside of our event framework.
That goes beyond the confines of that particular event,
the confines of the booking and what their obligations are to the event.
Yeah.
And a lot of these events involve, you talked about multi-generational, action sports particularly lends itself to the fact that parents are passing on to their kids parents are a lot of the young skaters, their dads used to skate,
right?
So when they come together, the dads are coming together with their old friends who they haven't seen since the last time they got together, and they see their kids playing together, and that multi-generation thing works in different ways.
And I think that's always amazing with fandom of multi-generational coming together. But I think in sport often misses that trick of, you'll often see in tennis, the legends in the crowd and being acknowledged. But I think a lot of sports sometimes miss the trick of how to blend the two. Either like in football, the legends come to town, but it's very separate from the actual modern products.
Great, Hass. So let's bring everything together. Let's try and put together a playbook for brands. What are the 3 cardinal rules for a brand to play in this space in an authentic, culturally meaningful way? Go.
Yeah, I think removing friction at all given opportunities. I think removing friction through, understanding what people can afford, how people come to your event, having the information early enough for them to make plans. A lot of your community may be working multiple shifts and multiple days, and how they can need to book time off for the event. All those things become important. And I think some of those can be inherently beneficial in bringing less able people to your event. At the Rampart Up event, we were able to attract one of our skaters who's technically blind, and another skater who's deaf. And by having no friction allows those people to many people to come from many different paths. The second component, I think, is building a legacy through infrastructure, being able to contribute something that lives beyond your event. I think it's important to leave something behind, because that's how the community will remember you, and that's how you have left something that people can continue to use, and they will use it until you come back. And it's something that, particularly done with the members of the community, often means that there's an investment component that goes back to the community, and that improves their skills, so that obviously in the second and third iteration, that their work will improve. And I think that's, very critical. And for the third one, I think, it's the idea of being able to be consistent and to play the long game. And I think that is always going to leave a much better mark than if you come and you badge and you remove your logos the day after the event and leave nothing behind. I think being able to not think about extraction of value, but to add the value and to do it consistently.
Just
and
mean it.
And but to not be focused just on the brand exposure, but the values and the experience
and own it.
And own it. Yeah.
Nice.
Fantastic.
Okay. Great. So Hass, thank you so much. You've helped us mop up the bits of questions that we spilled on the floor in the spirit of what you just talked about. That was amazing. You've been very generous with your time and knowledge and experience. Thanks for coming on the pot to stir with us.
I've always appreciated what you guys do for your peers, and I think it's great to have the opportunity to share what we do with them. Thank you.
Hass, where can people follow Millennial Events and keep up to date with the various things you're running and involved in?
We have a website, Millennial Events, but interestingly, I post extensively on LinkedIn around the company and around the culture that we are involved in. But also our company Instagram account has other elements of reposts from other partners that helps both our community within understand what's going on and those outside.
Amazing. So yeah, please continue to like and subscribe to Potluck on all of the key platforms, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And yeah, I think without further ado, we're all wrapped up.
And in the meantime, keep it brewing. Can we do it once with you too? You say keep it brewing. Yeah. And in the meantime, keep it brewing.
Okay.